right, thank you, Hector. I do want to thank everybody at Optimus, and especially Hector, for inviting me to participate and be able to share some of the knowledge about barcoding for Dynamics GP. So thanks for joining me this morning. So the purpose of this will be a quick course in the important points of integrating barcoding technology pretty much into any system, but I do have some specific examples as it relates to Dynamics GP. I am aware that for whatever kind of technical issue here, it does look like my screen is a little truncated on the left or the right. I think on some of your monitors, but I guarantee that the content of interest is pretty much dead center. So we'll try that one. So let's get started. So one of the things that I really want to do with this is to begin with the end in mind. And if you were ever a fan of any of Stephen Covey's books, specifically The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you know that it's easy to grab that piece of wisdom from him. So I do want us to give some consideration to what do we gain by barcoding? What's the purpose behind doing that? Well, the most important thing from our standpoint is that we're really getting an instant and foolproof way to capture data. So if you think about the way that that something typically happens to get into your system, you're probably writing it down on a piece of paper, or somebody in the warehouse or somebody in your office is scribbling down something that you can hopefully read. And then you read it or misread it, and then you key it into a system and hopefully not miskey it. So the point behind this is that we really want to get past the errors that would occur by somebody's sloppy handwriting, where you're trying to figure out, was that a 3, was it a 5, was it an 8, maybe it's the symbol for pi, I really can't quite tell. So the purpose behind that then is get it written down, or avoid the writing it down, avoid the reading, and avoid the rekeying of it. The other point that's very important on what we're trying to do here with barcoding is we're trying to shift the responsibility for tracking whatever we're dealing with, whether it be inventory or a fixed asset, to where it really belongs. And that typically is the person that is standing right in front of the piece of inventory or the asset. Once we do that, because of this, what we get is an accurate view of our inventory or assets. It's up to date. We have the correct items, the correct quantities, the correct locations. So let me ask you this, are you experiencing these warning signs? Do you have a warehouse potentially that you're relying on some person to know where the inventory is, or some person that's in charge of your assets to know where those assets are? So specifically, are you relying on that person to just know what you have and where it is? Are you handwriting on a paper-based form that you've either received a piece of inventory or reassigned a new custodian for a fixed asset? Are you ignoring lot or serial data because it's painful to manually track? And are you not using the oldest lot or serial item because it just is too much of an investment in order to track that? Here's another warning sign. Are you keeping what we like to call nervous inventory? And by nervous inventory, we mean, is your on-hand inventory higher than you really need because you don't trust your numbers? So in other words, do you have a set of inventory set aside because you know you've got to delay between when somebody enters it on a piece of paper, when that piece of paper finds its way to the office, and to where the data entry person is finally punching that in? For many of our customers, before they put in barcoding, that could be 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 days, sometimes as long as a week, before they actually can recognize that they've received the inventory and that it's in their warehouse. And because of that, and because they've become accustomed to that, they go, well, let me just, order more of this, either on mistake or on purpose. So the implications of doing that is you have dollars that are trapped in inventory. You're probably using more warehouse space than needed, which hurts to some degree if you own your warehouse, but it really hurts a lot if you happen to be in outside storage and you have to pay someone else to hold on to this excess inventory because you're paying by the foot. The other big problem here is that products can expire or become obsolete before you can sell them or use them. So being able to get rid of something on a first in, first out basis can be very important. Another question, are you only tracking your inventory or your assets at a warehouse or large scale level because the detailed locations are too hard to manage? So from the standpoint of inventory, think about, well, what about the aisles in my warehouse? What about the trucks that I use to service people with, or to be able to move inventory from one warehouse to another? What about job sites? Well, the thing that's important to remember is GP can track by bin, but it's much easier with a barcode system. So the implications here, you're probably wasting time searching for your stuff. One more. Do you know what happens to your inventory or why it happens? I think most of us are familiar that Dynamics GP will give you reason codes for an inventory adjustment, and it's important that you have your team use them, but it's much easier when you're able to record that reason right at the point in time that the instance occurs. Here's another question. Can you account for what's known as shrinkage? And by shrinkage, it's sort of a polite way to say things that are either broken in the warehouse or things that someone may have taken, relocated. Inventory shrinkage on average across the industry's average is about 1.5% of sales. That's a lot of money. But inventory perceived as under control is less likely to be taken. Can you hold your staff accountable for the accuracy of the inventory or your fixed asset register? And do you know who performed the transaction and when it was done? And lastly, do you have someone that's simply dedicated to data entry? And if you do, how long is the delay before the data entry is made? What problems does it cause by having that person that's taking pieces of paper and trying to read them and type them in as fast as they can in order to keep the balance of your inventory and assets accurate? Well, it usually means that they're making entry mistakes no matter how careful they are. That you've got the nervous inventory scenario that I previously described. And chances are you've experienced some missed sales opportunities because you didn't realize you had inventory in stock or had it promised to someone else. And specifically, how about your fixed assets? Things like laptops and tablets and data servers and other peripherals. How about things like tools and other portable equipment, expensive things that are moving? And even things that don't move so much, like machinery and furniture. Why tag the assets? Well, it simplifies the identification of the asset. It discourages theft because it's, again, perceived as under control. It allows you to make a tie to a custodianship. Who is responsible for this laptop? And it also makes the auditors happy because keeping track, an accurate track of a fixed asset ledger is one of the core points that an auditor usually seeks. So given this, let's ask, what is the data that we're really capturing at this point? Well, it's important to know that the barcode simply represents an identity. And in the examples that we have here, you can see that what we're talking about is it's an item code. In this case, it's a location. In this case, it's an order number or an employee ID or a vendor ID. The piece that you see here underneath the barcode is what's known as the human readable component in a barcode. And that's all it is it just is representing that human readable component. So, item or asset, location or person, perhaps a document reference. But it's important to realize that just identifying something isn't enough. You need one more thing. A barcode alone does not tell you where is it. It doesn't tell you how many do I have. It just tells you what. And it's important to know that a well-designed system captures that what and a related action. So for example, item X123 was sold. It was received. We moved it from section B11 to B99. And this is interesting because in this action, the what actually has the item, a starting bin, and an ending bin. Or it was assigned to custodian Clark Kent. So it's important to remember that the takeaway here is the identity, which is provided by a barcode, and the action, which is provided by the transaction, is the way that you gain control. So how do you capture that action? Well, it's important to remember that inventory movement, it doesn't just occur in the office. It doesn't occur next to the computer in the warehouse unless you have a lot of computers in a very tiny warehouse. It happens at the receiving or shipping dock. It might happen in the warehouse aisle. Could happen on a production line. Could happen in a truck or on a job site, or even more, at a trade show or at your customer. And that's particularly interesting if you happen to have consignment customers. From an inventory standpoint, let's look at what these key inventory actions might be. We tend to see most of what happens to inventory in this world as things that are coming in, and then the green section here is where it bounces around under your control, and things that go out. So let's just address this from the in standpoint. Typically, you are receiving products from a vendor, typically products that you may have ordered or that you've been asked to be accountable for. So you receive these in, and they get placed in your warehouse or your stockroom. Once these have been received in, then there's a set of actions that you typically do once they're within your custodianship. You might move it or transfer it to another warehouse, or to make space for it, or to consolidate items that are similar to each other. You might perform some miscellaneous adjustments like, oops, I damaged it, or gosh, I've got to add another one. You might perform the physical count, which is an important way to know that regardless of how careful you are on transactions, this gives you the opportunity to reconfirm that everything is there. Put-aways, bin movements, site transfers, adjustments. These are the things that we tend to do once we're in our, within our control. Once it gets to the point of where you then need to remove it from your facility, then typically that happens in two ways. You're either going to issue inventory, or you're going to fulfill an order. So in places where you may be doing a job or a service or repair, that issuing of inventory would be something that says, I'm using this for this given project, and that's how I'm removing inventory, quite often because I'm responsible for completing a repair on something, or completing a project. And then also, probably even more typically, is if you're selling product, then you're fulfilling the order for a customer. So this in, manage, and out is really the way that we see inventory actions. What about fixed assets? Well, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of these assets, they're not movable. So in the instance that I have here, you have a facility that has a number of assets, and they all seem to be expensive and important. So having a barcode on there is going to be a great way to wind up knowing that what it is. And some of these are even on wheels. So you know that these are likely to find their way from one room to another. So what's the solution to this? Well, the solution is you bring the computer to the action, because it's not practical to bring all these items to a computer. So the items that are off on the right here are some of the types of mobile devices that we would recommend someone consider for this. And what we think you need is a handheld wireless computer with an integrated barcode scanner and hopefully a keyboard. We don't think that in most of the instances here for inventory and actually tracking fixed assets frequently, that a phone is an appropriate thing to use, because the phone gets dropped, because the phone doesn't have a keyboard and it winds up tougher to entering in quantities. So not an iPad is another one of the ones too, because an iPad is difficult to carry around consistently and again doesn't meet some of those needs. So we seem to think that you need hardware suited for the task. And something to keep in mind here is that warehouses and stockrooms, they need durability and they need efficiency. So we think what you need is a dedicated barcode scanner and a button. So if you've seen these devices before, you understand that what they have is 1 or 2 or 3 buttons, depending on what it is. It's always within either your fingertip or your thumb's reach to be able to say, I want to turn on the scanner, not I want to wind up using a camera. If you've ever tried that experience while trying to scan a barcode with your phone, you know that that's fine if I'm just doing it occasionally, but if you're going to do it quite a bit, it gets to be quite frustrating. We also think, given the fact that you're going to use these in a high-duty environment, that quick swap batteries and cradles and holsters that you can keep the device handy to you, and potentially a mount that might go on a vehicle or a fork truck. We also think it's important too that you have software that locks out distractions and meddling, because once you put these into your environment, the last thing you want is to find out that someone is spending their whole day using the device you just put in their hands to check their Facebook status or tweets. And we think too that a hardware keyboard, or particularly small thumbs, are important, because I don't want to tell this burly looking guy that's wearing the scary hat and the glasses here that the thing that he should be doing is to make his thumb smaller because he's trying to scan stuff. And don't get me wrong. Go ahead.
And Mike, yeah, I've been working in the Caribbean and Florida, the U.S. for so many years. I mean, this is not a territorial thing. I mean, I've been both in warehouses in the U.S., in Europe, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean, and I've seen these guys going up on a forklift, and they may be on a second or third pallet story, and you'll see the handheld drop right from up there. There's not a lot of hardware that can hold that. I've been in warehouses where I've seen pallet trucks run over a handheld. It does happen, right, on a day-to-day. So typically when I see a forklift, a little pallet truck, and I see multiple stories in a rack shelf or in a pallet shelf, basically, this is the necessary hardware to go with. Same thing when people are driving around, especially in the Caribbean where we have so many potholes and let's say a lot of times in the Caribbean, the access to infrastructure where we're maybe dealing with end customers is not the same as the U.S., right? So, definitely it's not just considering this may fall out of my hand and hit the floor type of thing, but it's this can fall from 20 feet and 20 meters, right? And it hit the floor.
Absolutely. Yep, a very good point. The other thing, too, to keep in mind as well is that many of the environments that are manufacturing or distributing something are suffering from two other environmental factors, one of those being moisture. So you want something that has an IP rating that knows that it's going to keep out some of that moisture, which typically may not be a phone, and also dust and the ability to wind up keeping that. And I can't say enough too about the need to have some of those quick swap batteries or ability to drop it into a cradle, because what we're looking for here is a device that's going to last you 5 years, not one that's going to do it. I know that having a smartphone and plugging that in every night after 6 months, that connector starts kind of getting wobbly. So, and we're not talking about that much additional dollars, especially when you wind up considering what you're putting into it.
Yeah, and we do have some people here in the webinar from the food and beverage industry, and I do know that some of them have freezers, and they also have coolers, not only dry goods. So, good point when you said humidity. Part of the analysis also done on the hardware is making sure that the device that's being used is appropriate for climate control where it's located, right? Typically, for example, I have clients who distribute meats, and I've implemented like this type of technology before. And first thing is you have these operators with big jackets. I mean, these are just 0-degree Fahrenheit freezers, right?
Right.
Celsius, negative, whatever. So, I mean, these guys use big gloves. They have jackets. Their mobility is somewhat challenged. The floors sometimes are slippery, so it's not only the handheld falling, but if it's not the appropriate hardware, even on a handheld basis, it can end up damaging the device. So whenever evaluating this type of technology, also it's very important for clients to communicate. Wait a minute, for example, I'll use the example of McDonald's in Latin America and the Caribbean. I did a big project for them. They actually had separate handheld for the freezer than what they had in dried stock and in their coolers, right? Everything from hamburgers to produce in a cooler to tomato ketchup outside of a cooler. So in their case, they chose a particular handheld for the freezer. And then one that was refrigerator, let's say, resistant, humidity resistant, because people were walking in and out of coolers. So, very important, not only consider dust and, as you were saying, Mike, and humidity, but also other conditions.
Yep, exactly. I couldn't agree more. And that is some of the things that we ask as we're starting to implement a system too, because you're right, with that deep freezer cold, they do actually have heaters on the units, because the condensation of making that trip inside and outside of the freezer is really what starts to wreck it. So there's actually heaters on the BarCode window and on the screen itself. So yeah, very good point. Well, and because of that, you lead into my point as well as to the tablets or phones are okay if you're mostly viewing and querying. But scanning via that camera is particularly painful, and supporting the durability is critical in the field or stockroom. And because of that, the consumer devices, they're really not cheaper, because these purpose-built devices, as you mentioned, Hector, they can be dropped without damage. They don't require an OtterBox, and I've never found an OtterBox cheaper than $50 to add onto the phone. They have the built-in scanners, which usually if you take a consumer device and you add a scanner, even a cheap Bluetooth scanner, you're usually talking about a couple $100. But the right way to do it, if you are going to do it that way, is going to putting what's called a sled, where the phone slides in there. And typically a fairly decent sled is going to still be $400 or $500. And if you think about it, that phone isn't really costing you $100 or $200 because you have to bury the contract in there. So most of these phones are $500, $600, $700, and now you've just easily stepped in for the same amount of money, you're going to get the proper device. And then I will mention once again too about controlling distractions through lockdown software. So if you or your IT team have gone in and implemented one of these devices, the last thing you want somebody to do is to start going through and playing with the Wi-Fi settings, or going through and starting to use it to issue tweets or check Facebook. The other thing too is these have a long life and replacement parts, and I'm not talking about a couple years, I'm talking about 5 years, 8 years. For most of that, it just becomes obvious that the overall cost is less because everything is already in there and they're optimized for this exact task. And one of the points that I will make is consider this long-range scanning. So in most scenarios here, if you're in a warehouse, you need to find a way to scan either the aisle or the bin that you are. And in a lot of cases, that bin marker might be more conveniently hung by being up in the ceiling. That's 20, 30 feet up. You cannot with a phone easily wind up making that scan, and you can't with a cheap scanner do that. So this is one of the things that we ask as we're going through the scenario, and I'll show you what some of these overhead barcode tags look like. And lastly, you're not replacing these devices every other year. So this is the device, right? So the hardware built for the purpose. So the next question is, okay, well, let's assume that we've collected this and we know what the value of doing things as a transaction would be. Where do we put the data? And by that we mean, what is your system of truth? What is the system that you go to figure out what I've got? You know, I've got my inventory, so is that a warehouse management system, or is it my fixed asset management system? Well, don't you already have that inventory and asset database inside of Dynamics GP? Well, we think you do, so we don't think you need to have a separate system when you can extend Dynamics GP by way of a mechanism that we're providing. So the recap so far: scan the item when you're interacting with it, use devices that are purpose-built for the task, and put the data where it belongs. How do you do that? Well, here's how you do that. There's 3 best practice rules. Number 1, you label your inventory or your assets so that you can identify it. And by labeling your inventory or your assets, we predominantly care about the barcode. The second thing that you do is you record the transaction as it happens. So whatever you're doing to interact with that piece of inventory or asset, don't miss that at the time it happens to capture it. And then 3, you periodically confirm the accuracy via physical count, because this closes the loop of being able to, you know, capture all your transactions. So number 1, label your inventory or your assets. Well, as I mentioned before, remember that the barcode is just numbers and letters. So for example, it could be an item number, a lot code, an asset ID, a serial number. It could be a bin. It's just a key to a database record, and it's important to remember that database is there to hold the rest of the story. So because of that, we feel strongly that the label should avoid any information that changes. No location, no price, because what you don't want is you move the inventory and that label is wrong if you had the location on it. And you don't want the price on there because the grocery stores a long time ago figured out, well, that's not useful when I want to put something on sale, or if I need to raise a price, I'm not going to keep putting the price on it. Instead, the barcode gets taken to the register, they scan it, and that's what the price is. Also, no quantities on there unless it identifies an inseparable unit like a 10-pack, because the last thing you want to do is to have to keep crossing out the fact that, well, there was 9, now there's 8, no, now there's 7. You don't want that on there as well, because the quantity should be held in the system. But it seems reasonable that there might be some text that would help you identify or pick the part if it were sitting on a shelf. So maybe something that would help you identify the unit of measure. Maybe if you're dealing with lot tracked information, that you would have an expiration date, and maybe an item description, which is always good to have on the product as long as you're not using that item description for picking, because you could have 30 characters, and the distinction between one 30-character description and another one, that leaves you room for somebody to make a mistake. So let's talk about the kind of barcodes and what these are. So this The screen in front of you now is showing what is a one-dimensional barcode, and by one-dimensional barcode we mean it can be read with a line going across. So this is that typical red laser line that you'd expect to be going through a barcode. And what you see is there are several symbologies, and by symbology, think dialect, think variant of what this is. So this is barcoding, but each one of these is sort of a different language that has a value in different parts of the world, industry, kind of a thing. So for example, on the left you'll see that there's this code 39, beneath it code a bar. In the center is interleaf 205. Interleaf 205 you see a lot on the side of boxes that is video jetted on, that tends to represent cartons. Beneath it is code 128. I'm going to get into that. GS1 128, I've got a specific slide to address that. Off on the right side is where you see UPC codes for the Uniform Product Council. And you see the A1 that's at the, hold on here. You see the A1 that's at the top. And then the other ones are European article numbering, which is kind of a variant of that. So each one of these has a different value. The ones on the right tend to be more for retail. But the thing I want to wind up making a point here is this code 3 of 9, you can see the code 3 of 9 is particularly interesting because this is the only barcode that you can actually do through a font substitution. So if you want to find an easy way to put a barcode on there, you can download a code 39, or otherwise known as a code 3 of 9 font, and you can type something in. You can try this in your notepad on Windows if you want. Go to the web, find a free code 39 font, which there are several that are out there. Type something into Notepad, just highlight that and change the font to that new font that you've got. It's kind of like Wingdings if you've ever played with those, and change that, and then you'll have a barcode. Now, one thing I will make sure that you remember is code 39 needs an asterisk to be used at the start and stop of that data. Otherwise, it won't be read. But the point here is that if you can change the font on a report and you can prefix and suffix with an asterisk, there you go. You just added a barcode to your report. That's the easiest way to add a barcode onto an existing report. But the part that I do want to specifically show you here is for you to contrast the blue lines that are here. The code 3 of 9 and the code 128 are representing the same data here. And what you can see is that code 128 is a skinnier barcode. It allows you to represent more data more densely. And we could actually compress that down a little bit more and have it so that it could be easily read. We prefer code 128 for marking any items on there. We can read pretty much any barcode, but that code 128 is one of the best ones to do that. Now that is going to require that you print it using our software or any other software that can print code 128. But that dense barcode is going to allow you to represent a longer part number, because the one we have in front of you here is just 8 characters, and you can see it's already getting kind of wide. So these are one-dimensional barcodes. Now you may also have seen two-dimensional barcodes as well too. So the one on the upper left here is PDF, which actually stands for Portable Document Format, PDF 417. A lot of people, if you flip your driver's license over on the back, chances are there's a PDF 417. The purpose of that 2D barcode is to represent a lot of data automatically in a small space. And that's one of the things you can do with the PDF 417. It looks like my screen is only partly updating. Let's try this again. I can see that what you guys are seeing isn't quite the same as I am.
Well, okay, there.
Yeah, let's try this again. Okay, I think you've got a two-dimensional barcode screen.
Yeah,
okay.
I do see it.
Okay, so the other thing that you can see here too is you have a QR code on the bottom left, and I think most people are now familiar with what a QR code looks like. If you look on the back of several boxes or on articles in magazines or whatever it is, you see this QR code. The QR code is easily identified because what it has is these 3 squares around the corners of it. The QR code is a great way to represent a lot of data. However, we would discourage people from using that ever to mark inventory or assets. And the reason for that is because the QR code is easily recognized. Everybody knows that what I should do if I see a QR code is pull out my phone and scan it. And the QR code is originally developed so that it would wind up having a specific action that that phone would take. So one of the more common ones is open a website and go here, so that if your phone knows, well, I can see this, I'm going to open a browser and do that. But the other thing you can do too is you can embed the ability to send a text message. You can embed the ability to add a contact. So now imagine for a second you're a guy in the warehouse and you're looking at these two different barcodes because you have some retail package. You want to make it real clear to him, don't bother scanning the QR code because all you're going to get is taken to some place that's going to give you a neat recipe for macaroni and cheese. That's not the right one to scan. So because of that, we would recommend, pretty straightforward, for a two-dimensional barcode, we strongly suggest that people are using data matrix. It's very compact. It's a great way to wind up making use out of the space that's on there, and you can represent a lot of data. So much data that, for example, that if you think on your thumbnail, that thumbnail can hold up to several hundred characters worth of data. So that's one of the best ones to use, is that two-dimensional barcode. So let's talk about warehouse labels and being able to track specific things in your warehouse. This is just something to think ahead if you're trying to figure out what to do. You can see towards the top here that there are various labels for being able to mount something on the floor and on the bottom as well too. So a tough environment for when you're on the floor down here. So these are actually riveted in and survive pretty well fork truck traffic going over them. Not always so great with pallets that are sliding over the top, but usually those are pretty good. You can see they're beveled on the edge. This is known as a floor label, again designed for tough environments. In the middle of the screen, what you'll see here is these are hanging signs that are kind of shaped with an angle, so that when you hang them, which a lot of people will hang them on like a cable or a piano wire sort of a thing, then these are angled down at typically around a 30-degree angle, so that you don't have to worry about scanning them if you're standing directly underneath them. And then you can see there's a variety of others. There's ones that'll go up and down on a post as well. So this winds up making the identification of an aisle or a bin or a section in your warehouse far easier. So one of the things I do want to talk about here is what's known as a GS1 application identifier. So if you are moving inventory, or if you're in the medical field and you're moving some or producing some of this, what there has been created a while ago is a standard that basically is an enforced standard. And also if you're dealing with a lot of the larger companies that are trying to move inventory around on their behalf, what this does is it says, hey, you know what? I know that I've got an item code and probably a lot code or a serial number and an expiration date and everything. And rather than giving you a label that has 5 or 6 different pieces of data in separate barcodes, let's come up with a standard that basically allows us to concatenate this data all in one. And I'll show you an example that'll make this really clear here. But if you look towards the right of the screen here, what you see is these codes, and there are several dozen, there's probably a couple hundred of these. These are the codes, these prefixes of the 01 is really the part number, and followed by 14 digits of data, and 02, and then you can see if there's a 10, then that'll be followed by a batch or lot number. Let me show you a better example here. So here's an example of a GS1 128, which is another variation of a barcode, but this follows the standard from GS1. GS1 is an evolution kind of the Uniform Product Council. So there's a standard that surrounds this, a group of characters that got together and said, all right, let's just figure out a way to play together. So what you see here is a barcode, and you see that there are parentheses in the human readable component of this. And what that what that has is the standard says that 01 followed by 14 digits is going to be known as an item number, and 10 followed by however much of data is a lot number. And 17 represents the expiration date. And then the 3202 is, this is a weight of this product with 2 decimal points in there. So that's 00255.50 is how that would be read. And of course you can have hundreds of different variations of what this look like, whether it's serial tracked or not. But the point behind here is that what you really are looking for is a system that would be smart enough to figure out how to take this and then parse the data into the item, the lot, the expiration date, and the quantity. And actually what you're seeing here is a screenshot that was actually from our software that knows how to do that. And we can form a lot of specific composite code reading as well. It's on there. But this is something that's important to keep track of because there's a lot of complexity around this. Most notably, the complexity is those parentheses aren't really in the barcode, so you need some smarts in order to figure out where one field stops and the other one starts. So let's jump to how do I get barcodes on my items? Well, one of the things to keep in mind is many vendors are already barcoding the items that they send to you, which is great, but they're usually putting on their vendor code and not your item code. Because if you think about, I may be ordering the same widget from 3 different suppliers, they're not going to all be very convenient to you and give you your barcode on there. But the good news is that GP can associate these vendor codes with your item code. And we make this really easy during the receiving process. So we can actually add those on the fly so that the next time you scan their vendor barcode, you're going to be able to see exactly, and we literally just flip that to the GP item code. The other alternative is that you automatically print labels during receiving. So think about when the best time to do this is from an inventory standpoint. Your purchase order is listing a handful of items from your entire item catalog that you're expecting to receive. So maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 items on that purchase order. So your chance of entering that purchase order and misidentifying an item is really conveniently limited at that moment, which is why it's a great time for you to wind up scanning the barcode or creating the barcode label at that point. And I've got about an 80 or 90-second video that I'll show you here as to how that looks. So your alternate plan for labeling is, well, you could pre-print barcodes for existing inventory, namely using a piece of software and not doing anything specifically with the scanning. It's inefficient, but it's better than nothing. You can take that software and point it to your GP database, which is, of course, a SQL database, to make that process easier. But the one warning I'm going to tell you, please don't forget this, is if you're familiar with GP's data, the way it is stored, there are trailing spaces that are coming from the database. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to strip the trailing spaces. We have some SQL database views we're happy to share with you, whether you're using our software or not. So we just want to make sure you don't put those in there because they will be encoded in the barcode if you don't trim those. So possible options is software from a company called Nice Label, software from a company that Siegel Scientific makes a product called Bartender. Some of that we can help. We've got some blog posts on this. Can I get a barcode on a report? As I mentioned before, you can get a barcode on a report. Code 3 of 9 is probably the easiest way to do that. You can do that with a pick sheet. You can add it to a job or service or an assembly document. An employee badge is a great way to do that if you want to identify some specific person that you've transferred ownership to. And we have an instructional blog post on that topic as well, too.
So Mike, for the people who came after we started to the presentation, the picture there on the right-hand side, the bald guy, that's not you. You have a lot more hair. So
that is not me, right? I have more hair. I have more hair. It's starting to get gray, but that's not me.
Yeah. So can you go back a slide for the previous slide for one quick second? On the Nice label, what I've seen primarily in the Caribbean and in Latin America and even in the US is Nice label. I'd say 70–80% of the last 17 years I've been interacting with ADC in over 100 clients. What I've seen is 70% of the cases Nice label, 20% bartender, and then the other 10% something miscellaneous. So Optimus highly recommends Nice label, but other ones do work. And you can go back to the slide you were at, and then and you know it's a great piece of software, flexible, and right in the case that of the implementations I work with you all, Michael, with Panatrack. We've been using Nice label from you guys. So in case people are taking notes or they have questions, you know, I do want to say this. And when I mention Nice label, Michael, and the 100 clients, they're not all clients who implemented Panatrack on GP. I've implemented barcoding in AX. We've implemented it or been involved in project and different versions of Oracle and JD Edwards. So when I say Nice label, and 70% of the customers out there in the Caribbean, Latin America, and what I've been involved in the US, I can tell you it's been Nice label independent of it, you know, Panatrack being one of Panatrack's recommended partners. So
good.
Just that little insight. Continue.
Good. Thanks. Thanks. That's useful. So so what the way we use Nice label is, if you guys want to get a head start on getting product labeled or whatever it is, we're a partner with Nice Label. You don't need to purchase it through us. A lot of people that we're dealing with, they already have it. When it comes then time to integrate with our system, then Nice Label, if you didn't purchase the suite, then there is an automation package that's there, and our interaction with that is really pretty clean. So our software has a specific handler to deal with the Nice Label job format. It's just a great way to wind up getting that stuff on there. So,
yeah, and also a clarification. Nice Label to ADC, Advanced Data Control, barcoding. Nice Label to Panatrack on GP. Nice Label to Dynamics AX, Warehouse Management, WMS. Nice Label to barcoding on JD Edwards. It's like saying database or SQL Server to an ERP system. So this is, and again, this is why I know a lot of people are taking notes, and this is a workshop, a learning experience. Nice Label is like a data, in a way I would treat it as a data, it's a prerequisite. It's just like when you're implementing an ERP system or CRM system, you buy the system, then you choose a database, SQL Server, Oracle database, or whatever, and then you choose your server. An HP server, a Dell server, a Lenovo server on the cloud or whatever. Same thing in barcoding. So you have to choose Panatrack. You have options on the hardware, right, which is the handhelds that Michael was discussing. So again, you get to choose between different brands, just like when you buy an ERP, you get to choose between HP, Dell, Lenovo, whatever. And also on the barcoding, it's almost like you're in an ERP system and you want to buy another reporting software, or you're choosing your database. It's a prerequisite. So it's not an additional cost that Panatrack is adding to a project where I get a lot of people say, oh, I need this. Oh, just another cost. No, it isn't. It's pretty standard. It's with every software. Your labeling software. It's not something that you typically find. There's a full module in a WMS system, and it's a free report writer. It isn't. It's literally a technology prerequisite.
Agreed. Good. Well, and because of that too, you can get a barcode on a report, and you can get as I mentioned before, on pick sheets, job or service or assembly documents. And as I mentioned before, in this case, you can get away with quite often using a free or almost free barcode font, because you're going to do the font substitution thing. And as I mentioned, we've got a blog post on there. So I'm going to give you like a 30-second overview of label printers here, just so you understand. There's two flavors of barcode labels. There's something that's called direct thermal, and direct thermal, it heats a chemical ink that's on a special label, right? So the label is the special piece here. It's got a coating that responds to heat. And thermal transfer, which transfers ink from a polymer ribbon, think typewriter, kind of is what it is. So direct thermal is okay to pick if it's okay that the labels fade over time, and that the labels are not exposed to sunlight or heat, because that same heat that created the image is also the one that's going to kind of mess the label up over time. And then because of that ink that's on there, that the labels are not prone to friction or abuse. For thermal transfer, we always say pick this if you like your job and you want to keep it. There really is very little reason to go with direct thermal. You're not saving any money. You now need special paper, and there's just so much that can go wrong with it. So we're a big fan of saying pick thermal transfer, get a thermal transfer printer, and do that. So just so you know how the thermal transfer works is, like I mentioned, it's a lot like a typewriter. There's a thermal transfer printhead. It heats and it transfers the image. It transfers the ribbon roll onto the roll of labels. It's really pretty simple. How about fixed asset labels? Well, we have a different opinion on fixed asset labels. We think that asset labels need to outlive the asset itself, right? It does you no good if you're winding up putting an asset label on a laptop and that label peels off or gets rubbed off after a few months. So because of that, the thing that you should be using here is something that has a strong adhesive, the label material is durable, and that there potentially is a protective clear laminate over the top of it. There's other options as well. You can get labels that are riveted on We work with a company called Metalcraft, and we'll, that's and perhaps you already have stuff on there, but we happen to think that what should go on there is potentially a logo, something that indicates that it's property. And we also are big proponents of buy these, don't print these.
Yeah, and Michael, excellent segue. We're actually working with a customer in Antigua with you all, and they have fixed assets that are climate exposed to climate, and sometimes and a lot of these have a 10+ year life, right? So they are looking at aluminum or anodized labels, one with a very strong adhesive, but they're also concerned that customers may try to take the barcode out. So they're taking a look at a anodized barcode, and obviously bought from a third-party company, like you said, not being printed, and then putting rivets on them to the metal of that particular fixed asset. So it does happen in the Caribbean. And one clarification I want to make is this is for fixed assets, right? This is not for inventory. So I do get sometimes people confused. And it's you're doing an excellent job, Michael. It's not that anything you said, but I do want to make sure that the people who are listening to this webinar understand that we just moved from managing stock inventory that may be in your warehouse a couple of days or a couple of months or a year. I mean, you're fine with a sticker, internal print and label, to now we're specifically talking about assets that could be anything from a computer in an air-conditioned office to a for example, we have people here from in this presentation who are listening in from the utilities industry. It could be a transformer, and it's not Transformer the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Let me clarify that. I forgot it's in the movie. I mean, maybe a transformer, maybe a generator, maybe a electric pole. It's stuff that's out there in the climate, taking rain, taking heat. Definitely you need to make sure that you have the appropriate label, and none of these labels are 100% human proof, right? Even with a rivet, you may have somebody with a screwdriver tools trying to take it out, but obviously you also want to make it as difficult as possible. So not only are these labels, like we're talking about weather and the life, and we're using examples 10, 20 years. But definitely the other issue is having the appropriate material label for human temper.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to clarify the point, we really are just aiming for somebody to put the right label on the for the right purpose that's on there. So yes, on the fixed asset side, if it's something that you're keeping around for a period of time, then we just, like I said, we just want that label to outlive the purposefulness of whatever it's attached to. So in the instance of where we're talking here, we're really talking about something that, that sticky label that's going to stay on there that won't suffer from any friction abuse. In the instance, we do have several customers that are utilities, so the riveted label with that bend is one of those that's on there. Even in the cases where you may have a drum, whether that be inventory or not, and by drum I mean like a chemical drum, there are labels that are provided that will deal with the caustic chemicals. So the point is that, and then even if you're talking about inventory and you're talking about keeping inventory in deep freezer, so where it's very cold, that is a special type of label as well too. It's not a permanent label necessarily, but it's one that would survive the coldness and the humidity of it, so there's a special adhesive there. So we'll help people find their way through all this stuff, but you're absolutely right. But as it relates to fixed asset labels, we see that there's 4 key transactions for asset management. The first one being is when you add a new asset, and we have a transaction that makes that simple. So think about adding a new asset. The system doesn't know anything about this asset, so chances are you might have acquired that asset by way of a purchase order process. So One of the neat things we do in our software is that we can optionally complete that PO receipt process too if you mark that as a capital item. So that adding a new asset is, let's describe the asset, let's pull out one of the pre-printed barcodes, let's stick it on the side of this new asset and let's scan that barcode, and now we've associated that. If you have an existing asset, then we want to make it easy for somebody to look up that asset and then associate a new asset tag to it. So here you're going through, you've just acquired the system and you want to get better control of your assets. So you're going to go through and here's a computer, here's a server, whatever it is. I'm going to look this up on my fixed asset register. You're going to do it from the handheld, and now I'm going to pull out a tag and I'm going to stick it on the side of it, and I'm going to scan that and I'm going to associate it. So that's how you get things in there. But once you get them in there, then you get the advantage of being able to update any existing asset with the new information, like it's in a new location, it's in a new server rack, it's in a new building, or it has a new custodian, and by that we mean the person that is now responsible for it. So if I take a Microsoft Surface laptop and it's formerly mine and now I'm giving it to Hector, I want to be able to make sure that that transition of ownership is properly recorded. And then the other part too that we find to be pretty interesting is, and important, is asset management by way of being able to do kind of what a physical inventory is. So if I've said that these assets are in a specific location, then it would be convenient for me to be able to pull up the location from a handheld and then scan what assets I would expect to find there. Basically a validation of what those are. So if I'm at a if I have a power station or if I have something and I know that I should see these pieces of equipment here in this cart and these transformers or this backup information that's there, then being able to say this is what I have seen. And we also make it easier too to say show me the stuff that I haven't validated in the last 30 days or 60 days or something. So this is the very long best practice number 1. The rest of these best practices are super fast, so we should be getting done here real shortly. Best practice number 2 is to record the action when it happens. So here's something to keep in mind. GP is designed to record inventory events after they occur. It's a batch system, right? So it's inefficient for real-time entry because it just isn't designed for it, right? So the things that you're doing for receiving purchase orders and the things that you're doing for doing order fulfillment, this is all stuff that occurs after the fact. And because of that, it's not designed to stop you from doing something stupid. It's not going to yell at you when you're about to pick the wrong item to go out on a customer's order. It's not going to yell at you when you're about to scan, or when you're not collecting lot information during a receipt process, right? And it doesn't capture the data in a convenient sequence when handling the item. So if you browse through the GP windows, it's no different than any other ERP system. It's asking you to record things with the mentality of, I've already done this. So therefore, if you think about, now I'm moving a pallet or I'm grabbing an asset, you want to be able to make it easy so that the person is pulling up that transaction and performing their action when they're actually standing over the inventory or asset. That's just not the way GP was designed. But instead, a transactional system, such as ours, for example, captures the when and where the activity occurs. It records it at the point that it happened and not later from a piece of paper. Because remember, we want one of the best practices to get the responsibility to the people that are actually touching the inventory. It also prompts the user in the correct sequence when handling the item, and it provides a real-time notification of the errors. So with all this stuff and not having all the other noise that comes from a regular screen, it's usually way easier to learn. And what I do want to do is I do want to show you just a quick 80-second video of a receiving example here. At least I want to try to do that.
Let's take a quick look at a receiving transaction using the efficiency of barcode scanning. The purchase order is validated against GP in real time. Easily scan each item and capture the quantity received. If a barcode isn't available, I have the option to look up the data with a lookup list. Lookup lists add additional information such as item quantities for the user. Easily capture serial numbers for items set up as serial tracked in Dynamics. If you have inventory that is lot tracked, we prompt the user to capture the lot number and details based on how you want your inventory set up tracked. A review screen can be accessed at any time during the capture of the transaction. When the transaction is ready to be submitted, it is immediately created in Dynamics.
So the good news on what you hopefully just saw there was that there was some very fast data capture that was occurring. The bad news is, unless you're on a fast internet connection, you missed a chunk of the magic. But basically, the point here is that we just performed a purchase order receiving transaction very quickly, and we're able to get this scanned and into GP quite fast. So, best practice number 3, periodically confirm your inventory or accuracy. Best way to do that, GP already has a pretty awesome stock count. Just add barcode scanning to quickly count without the paper. You don't need to print up all the count sheets and hand them to everybody. We do some pretty nifty stuff so that you don't have to necessarily tear apart warehouse aisles in order to count serial numbers. It's pretty cool. Evaluating a barcode system, just want to tell you you've got 2 options. One is data collection, which basically glues a mobile barcode scanner to GP's field and does what's called screen scraping. So this is kind of the old school way of doing it, where you kind of take that batch mode system that was designed to do things afterwards, but now instead of typing it at a screen over here, you're kind of sort of remote casting it so that somebody could be scanning a barcode and doing that. That's data collection. Your other option is standalone, which is basically another different system that sends periodic summarized updates to GP. The problem with the standalone system is now you're introducing some synchronizing on there, and we always say a man that has 2 watches never really knows what time it is. This is kind of that case. I've got inventory that is in my warehouse management system, but I'm also keeping track of inventory in Dynamics GP, or I've got fixed assets in this system, but I also know that I'm depreciating certain things in fixed assets on the other side. It's
so Mike, I love that analogy on the watch. That's actually Mark Twain. So
right.
Yeah, it's that definitely. When something synchronizes, it's not embedded in there. So what Optimus we recommend to our GPAX and JD Edwards install base is any data collection ADC system you use, in this case for GP. As we're using the example with Michael today here, basically being able to use the business logic and the business options within the ERP software, not only on the synchronization, but also when you set your business rules, right? So, business rule could be Hector scans and receives a PO. He transfers it, scans it, and transfer it to Sheridan. Sheridan does it, right? So, I mean, you can have these rules in GP on paper, or you can have them on a barcode handheld system. They're business rules, right? So when you have your ERP system sitting on one end and your WMS or your barcoding system sitting in another system, guess what? When you decide in your business to say, you know what, after Hector touches the inventory, Sheridan's not going to touch it. We're going to do this check here. We're going to do this, right? So you change your business rule. You have to go also to the ERP system and change it there. Go back to the WMS or the barcoding system, change it over there, right? Because they're different systems. You have to set up change the setups, and then you have to analyze if that affects the flow of data and the synchronization or integration that's built between both of those systems. So, definitely that rule about, when you have 2 watches, you'll never be able to have the correct, you won't be able to tell the correct time, right? It also applies to not only the data, but the business rules.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so recognizing that we don't want to be at that one where we've got a separate set of rules and a separate system, but also knowing that the data collection piece just doesn't give you enough power. What we've really done is we've created something that we like to say is embedded, and by that we mean the host data is remaining in GP, but we've added independent features to it. So whatever we're doing, we basically have the benefit of being directly connected to GP because we want that one source of truth. That's very important. But we also want the power to be able to have it to be warehouse management system-like, but not giving you the problem of a separate system to reconcile. So implementation considerations, if you're looking at, now this kind of goes a lot towards both inventory and fixed assets, but specifically if you're dealing with a warehouse, you want to create a good wireless network. So therefore, good coverage throughout the warehouse is important. And I will say there's a reason why consumer access points, if you're going to Best Buy or Walmart or something, there's a reason why those only cost $50. One of the reasons for that is that by design, they're just trying to cover your house, right? So you don't want to spill a lot of wireless signal outside of your house. Why bother with it, right? So that's a different sort of class than it is if you were to throw it into a warehouse. And we're not talking about several $1,000s. We're talking about from $50 to maybe $400, but it covers so much more of the warehouse. It gives you so many things, like some of the geeky things that we're talking about here of preemptive roaming, which is a neat way for the handheld to know that, hey, there's another access point coming up, and I'm going to talk to that before I release the connection to this access point that's over here, so you don't get this dropout. Being able to handle channel selection, which could be very important, along with alternate bands if you're in a busy office park or if you've got neighbors that are also broadcasting wirelessly, specifically neighboring wireless conflicts. And one thing we will say is that in our world, network bandwidth is less important. And by that I mean you don't need something that's going to stream video. I mean, we don't need that high of speed. What we just want to have is a reasonably fast, low latency network, which is far easier to achieve than trying to create something where you're going to be streaming YouTube videos throughout the place. So this is a great way to wind up being able to deal with it. If you need the capability for performing remote transactions in the field where you don't have a wireless connection, we do have a subset of extended offline transactions as well too. So as we come to the completion here, some suggested selection criteria, if you're thinking about doing something with this, as we've already said, is your solution using a single system of truth, or is it going to live separately and require reconciliation? I think we've proved the point here that that would be painful. Does the product have critical mass? And by that, is the vendor providing evidence that there's some ongoing support for host system updates? It's a very sad thing if you are engaging with a vendor to find out that that's a product that they don't have their weight behind. Is there a track record of product enhancements? Namely, can you see a history of things that are making that product better? Is there a community around it? Is the vendor truly partnered with the connecting system? There's a lot of scenarios here where someone will have kind of like a bolt-on to an existing system, but without really understanding the intricacies of that. You need somebody that's going to understand what it means when this transaction goes into GP. Can the product scale upwards when you grow? Was it architected to handle the growth? You may start off with 2 handheld devices connected to this, but you may get to 20 handheld devices. And I can tell you that some of our competing competitors, they're not architecting to handle that growth. Was data security considered? Because now everybody knows that it's a little bit of a scarier world as it relates to networks and computer systems. And is it easy to implement and support? Obviously, we think that we do meet all those needs. And I just wanted to open it up at this point in time if there's any questions that remain unanswered in your head. We'd like you to give a consideration to our system as well too. If you're not using our system and you're still, or at least anticipating to do that, and you do want to get a head start on getting some barcodes on your products or on your assets or on your shelves, locations, etc., we're happy to kind of point you in the right direction to do that as well too.